Welcome to my channel, The Untamed Savior. This rare Gypsy Vanner foal was left behind. There are certain places on Earth that seem to remember everything. Places where the silence is empty, but full of stories. Stories whispered on the wind, carried through the mist, waiting for an ear kind enough to listen. The valleys here, carved by time and memory, hold the echoes of struggle and triumph in equal measure. This particular piece of land, nestled against the foothills where the wild forest reluctantly gives way to pasture, was ready to share one of its deepest secrets. Elias knew this land better than his own shadow. He wasn't a hero or a savior, just a man who'd spent a lifetime tending to what others had forgotten. The tired fences, the old machinery, the animals who needed a quiet place to heal. He valued the consistency of the seasons and the simple language of nature. But even he couldn't have predicted the story that was about to unfold. Hidden just beyond the fence line that marked the boundary between his world and the unknown. It was a stillness that caught him around 6 a.m., just as the last shreds of fog were burning off. Not the peaceful stillness of the morning, which was usually filled with the distant lowing of cattle or the chatter of early birds, but the absolute, unnatural quiet of something desperately holding its breath. He heard no whinny, no cry, nothing, but the silence fell heavy, like a question he had to answer. It was a silence that spoke volumes of terror contained. He moved slowly, cautiously, pushing his way through the overgrown underbrush and rusty wire of the old boundary. And then he saw it, tucked deep inside the thicket of hawthorn and blackberry briars. Barely visible against the dark, damp earth was a tiny, huddled silhouette. A foal, but this was no ordinary foal. Even in its fear, there was a breathtaking quality to its presence, a certain dignity in the way it refused to move, banking on invisibility as its last defense. A rare Gypsy Vanner, covered in the distinctive, magnificent feathering this breed is famous for, the thick, flowing hair that guarded its lower legs. Yet tragically small, far too small for the chill of the morning. It was alone, utterly, completely abandoned. Frail and frightened, its coat dull, barely more than a shadow cast by the rising sun. Elias estimated it couldn't have been out there for more than a couple of days, maybe 3, but those days had taken a devastating toll. The instant their eyes met, Elias understood. This little one carried the weight of the world, and every fear it had ever known, right there in its tiny frame. He knew a sudden move, a loud word, a quick step, could shatter what little courage it had left, driving it further into the thicket or forcing it to panic and injure itself fatally. Elias didn't look away, holding the gaze, letting the foal read his intent or lack thereof. I am not a predator, his stillness communicated. I am only here. The first challenge was simply getting close without causing catastrophe. The foal wouldn't budge. Every muscle was locked, coiled for flight. Hours passed, marked only by the slow arc of the sun climbing the eastern sky. Elias sat down a good 30 feet away, motionless, his back against an oak tree, doing nothing but existing quietly. He was a patient sentinel, offering the only thing he had, stillness and time. He allowed the foal to study him, to map his contours, to decide if he was a feature of the landscape or a threat. This waiting, this long, agonizing absence of action, was the crucial first act of the rescue. He knew that the only way to earn trust was to prove he wasn't demanding it. He eventually retrieved a bucket of fresh, clean well water and a handful of sweet grass, setting them halfway between them, then retreating again. To be left behind is a language all its own. It's a wound that goes deeper than hunger or cold. It speaks of betrayal, of a sudden, incomprehensible severance from the only safety known. And the little Vanner, whom Elias silently nicknamed Valor for the sheer tenacity of its survival, had clearly learned that language too well. Every fiber of its being screamed that connection leads to pain, and solitude, however terrifying, was the only certainty left. Elias didn't try to talk down the fear. He just hummed an old, simple melody his grandmother used to sing while milking cows. A quiet sound that asked nothing, expected nothing. It was an offering of peace, a sound that filled the heavy silence with something gentle and non-threatening, not a demand for trust. He stayed there as the day wore on, refusing to move until Foal gave him a sign. Hunger was wrestling with fear. The tiny body was demanding sustenance, The ribs were becoming distressingly prominent, but the instinct to flee was still overwhelming. It was a desperate calculation playing out in those wide, intelligent eyes. Is the risk of trusting this human less than the risk of starving? The battle waged internally, a silent, life-and-death struggle. Elias watched the foal's muzzle twitch, catching the scent of the water, then pulling back in an invisible recoil. Elias understood the need for privacy in the moment of surrender. He slowly stood and walked away, turning his back deliberately, moving just out of sight behind the protective bulk of the oak. He waited, listening, his heart pounding a slow, deliberate rhythm. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do for a frightened soul is to simply not watch them struggle, to give them the dignity of making their hardest choice in private. Finally, a soft, desperate lapping sound broke the silence. Elias heard it distinctly, a sign of urgent need finally overriding the paralyzing fear. The first step towards accepting help is the hardest. It's the moment the soul whispers, "I can't do this alone." And for Valor, that whisper was the sound of water being drunk with feverish intensity. Elias slowly returned, very cautiously, carrying a warm, soft woolen blanket draped over his arm. Valor was still standing but had stopped drinking, his head immediately snapping up, ready to bolt. He watched Elias, the fear returning instantly, but his exhaustion held him in place. Elias wasn't reaching out. He was offering warmth, comfort, and a stable presence. He placed a blanket gently on the ground, a few feet from the foal, then sat again, allowing the soft wool to carry the scent of humanity, but humanity that had not yet hurt him. The tiny Vanner studied the blanket, perhaps seeing the first real piece of safety it had known in days. The fear hadn't vanished, but for the first time, hope had cast a shadow long enough to settle in. Day 2, the long game of trust, had begun in earnest. Elias did the simple things, the things that create an unshakable rhythm of predictability. He brought fresh feed, he cleaned the area of any mess, and he sat. He read a tattered paperback, occasionally talking softly to the air, to the trees, to Valor, about the weather or the price of hay. He didn't try to rush the healing. He understood that a wounded, deeply traumatized animal needs predictability more than anything else. He needed to be a constant, reliable presence, not an exciting event. But as the morning wore on, a new, painful truth became clear, something the darkness had concealed. It wasn't just fear holding him back. Valor was injured, a slight but definite wobble in his step as he walked to the water bucket, an avoidance of placing full weight on his delicate front left leg, a grimace of pain that flashed across his muzzle when he shifted his weight. The diagnosis was clear enough, even from a distance. Probably a bad sprain, perhaps something more serious like a hairline fracture from a fall or a frantic attempt to keep up with the herd. And Elias knew, to properly heal, Valor needed more than just a quiet pasture. He needed veterinary attention, fluids, pain management, and the safety of a clean, padded barn stall. He needed touch, the gentle, firm touch of intervention. Abandonment is rarely a conscious choice of the innocent. Valor's mother was likely driven off by a predator, or caught in an emergency that left her no option but to flee and save herself. But for the foal, it was only the cold, hard reality of being left behind that mattered. Elias felt a profound, aching empathy for the little fighter, knowing the terror that must have seized him in those first solitary nights. He saw not a rescued animal, but a soul yearning for an anchor. Elias slowly moved closer, reducing the distance between them by mere inches every 10 minutes. He extended his hand, palm up, holding a piece of sweet apple, the universal language of friendship. He spoke softly, not rushing the moment. It was time for the leap of faith. Elias closed the distance, speaking in that soft, steady rhythm. "You're a strong one, aren't you? A little spark of fire in those tiny legs. But fire needs fuel. You need to let me help. I won't hurt you." The apple is a translator. Sweetness and nourishment, overcoming the bitterness of fear. The distance closed. The Gypsy Vanner foal lowered his head, a gesture of profound vulnerability, and took the bite, his soft lips barely brushing Elias's hand. He ate slowly, tentatively, never taking his eyes off the man. Elias knew this was his chance. He gently, slowly reached out and stroked the foal's forehead, just between the eyes, where the tension was most visible. Valor flinched, his body tightening in a full-body spasm, but he didn't pull away. The taste of the apple, the exhaustion, and the gentle rhythm of the man's heart held him. The first touch. It was electric. 1,000 volts of fear and a single spark of connection. Valor didn't relax, not entirely, but he allowed it. He felt the warmth, the steadiness of the human hand, and didn't perceive a threat. He stood trembling, letting the unfamiliar sensation of kindness wash over him. In that instant, the dam of fear broke just a little. The tiny Vanner seemed to sigh, a deep, full release of held tension that Elias could almost hear. He wasn't just accepting the touch. He was leaning on it, the weight of his large head shifting slightly into Elias's palm. It was a moment of profound, wordless dependence, a child reaching for a parent in the dark. The truth of the injury was now fully visible. Elias gently ran his hand down the foal's neck, then carefully examined the injured leg. His expression won a serious concentration. He felt the slight heat, the tender swelling just above the ankle. It was manageable, yes, but it demanded immediate indoor care, anti-inflammatories, and a controlled environment. There was no more time for hesitation or gentle waiting. The rescue had to move to the next critical phase, one that required trust far deeper than accepting an apple, a small, rare creature swaddled in hope. Elias slowly placed a blanket over Valor's back, then, gathering him up gently, lifted him with surprising ease. The Gypsy Vanner foal, once a wild silhouette in the briars, was now completely dependent on the strength and kindness of this weathered man. Valor, exhausted and sensing intention was not malice, did not fight. Elias held him close, speaking word that mattered more than he knew. "It's all right, Valor. We're going home now. We're safe." Every step toward the barn was a step away from the cold reality of abandonment and toward a future nobody could promise, but they could certainly fight for. This was more than a rescue operation. It was a repatriation of the soul, a carrying of a broken promise back toward wholeness. The weight in Elias's arms was light, but the responsibility felt immense. The new sanctuary. Inside the barn, Val was gently placed on a thick bed of fresh, soft straw in a clean, quiet stall. The light was soft and warm, filtering through the dust motes dancing in the high windows. For the first time, Valor was surrounded by the security he'd been so desperately missing. He was safe. The silence in this place wasn't lonely. It was protective. He lay down immediately, a sound of relief escaping him, his head resting heavily on the clean bedding. The cavalry arrived in the form of Dr. Lena, a veteran large animal veterinarian whose gentle hands and no-nonsense approach had saved many a troubled soul in the valley. She confirmed the diagnosis: a bad sprain, severe dehydration, and near starvation. The little Vanner needed immediate intravenous fluids, pain relief, and weeks of careful, absolute rest. The decision was now a commitment. The initial rescue was over. The lifelong healing was beginning. "You've done the impossible, Elias." "He wouldn't have lasted another night out there," she said, her voice quiet but firm. But the impossible had just begun. Now came the long, grinding work of constant care, medication schedules, and earning trust day after day, dose after dose. Healing is not a single event. It is a relentless, steady process. Elias became a full-time guardian. His life revolved around the 3-hour feeding schedule, slow, careful bottles of warm milk replacer, the gentle change of the bandages, the measured doses of medicine, and the quiet, reassuring presence. He didn't sleep much, grabbing only an hour or two on a cot in the tack room, but he was awake, truly awake, mindful of every twitch of Valor's ear, every change in his breathing. The healing was not linear. Some days, Valor seemed bright, full of spirit, trying to nibble Elias's fingers with playful mischief. Other days, the pain and the memory of loneliness weighed him down, and he would lie listlessly, refusing the bottle. He would try to stand, putting weight on a recovering leg, only to wobble and stop, met with a fresh reminder of his fragile state. He would whine softly, a sound that tore at Elias's heart. Elias would hold him during the difficult feedings, supporting the tiny body, taking the strain onto his own legs as the foal struggled to balance. He was lending his strength to this small fighter, sharing his own energy. It was an unspoken vow. I will be your stable ground until you find your own. It was a quiet love affair, built on patience and the smell of warm milk and hay. Weeks passed, turning into a month. The darkness lifted, replaced by a growing, undeniable light in the barn. Valor was becoming himself. The rare, striking beauty of the Gypsy Vanner was starting to shine through the thinness and the fear. His coat slicked out, his feathering thickened, and he started to exhibit the bold, curious nature of his breed. He was finding his courage again, one strong step at a time. The look in his eyes had changed completely. The wide, fearful panic was replaced by a familiar, steady trust. He now looked at Elias not as a potential threat, but as his certainty, his gravity, his reason for trying. The bond was forged not by convenience, but by crisis and shared vulnerability. He was no longer a rescue, but family. The day came when the bandages were finally removed for good. The leg was strong. The slight heat was gone. The limp was history. Elias brought the halter and lead line, not to control him, but to guide him. He walked slowly to the stall door, unlatched it, and stepped back. The vast, green field of the main pasture was open to valor, the sunlight warm and inviting. The true test of freedom was at hand. Valor paused at the threshold. He stood there for a long moment, the wind stirring his mane. He looked at the open space, the freedom he was born for, and then he looked back at the safety of the man who had saved him, the quiet warmth of the stall he had come to know. It was a choice, the wide, wild world or the certain warmth of his protector. The silence was deafening. Elias gave a single gentle nod. Go, little friend. Show them what you can do. Valor took a breath, lowered his head, and stepped out. He took a first, tentative step, then a second, then an explosion of joy. He kicked up his heels, the air vibrating with his excitement. He ran a short, beautiful, powerful loop in the grass, his thick feathering flashing in the sunlight. He was no longer running from fear, but running toward life. He was celebrating his second chance with every joyous, powerful stride. And the ultimate proof of the bond. He didn't run to the far fence. He slowed, finished his loop, and trot-walked directly back to Elias, nudging his hand affectionately with his muzzle. He was free, but he chose to be near. He chose the connection. The greatest act of trust is choosing the hand that healed you, the voice that calmed your terror, the heart that waited patiently for you to mend. Valor grew, not just in size, but in spirit. He became a fixture on the farm, a stunning, gentle giant whose spirit seemed to reflect the unwavering hope that had saved him. His lineage shone through, a magnificent creature who walked with the confidence of the royalty his breed represented. He was a constant, living reminder of what patience can accomplish. Elias never sought recognition. For him, the reward was quiet, private, and profound. The sight of a creature who had been broken, now wholly healed and thriving. Valor would follow him to the fields like a loyal shadow, occasionally resting his head on Elias's shoulder in a gesture of simple, powerful affection. It was the purest form of stewardship, a reciprocal agreement of life and love. Quick moments passed into years. Valor's journey became a quiet legend in the valley, a story told in whispers about the small, abandoned Vanner who defied the odds. He stood now, tall and majestic, his presence filling the pasture with an air of settled, peaceful strength. We all carry briar patches in our memory, places where fear once held us captive, places where we felt abandoned and alone. But Valor showed that even the darkest, most frightening beginnings can lead to the brightest future. The past is only a shadow if you choose not to look to the light that now shines for you. Every breath he took, every proud, spirited toss of his magnificent head, every playful challenge in the morning air, was a testament to the fact that kindness is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is the only true language that can translate fear into trust and despair into destiny. Elias, the quiet sentinel, finally allowed himself a moment of true peace. He hadn't just saved a Gypsy Vanner foal. He had reinforced a deeper truth, that the greatest stories of the human heart are often told not with words or grand gestures, but in the simple, quiet act of caring for the most vulnerable among us. He had proven that sometimes all a lost soul needs is one steady hand, one quiet corner, a relentless belief in the power of a second chance. The real strength of a champion is not how hard they fall, but how completely they rise. The depth of healing is always measured by the patience of the healer. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because every soul, no matter how small, is waiting for its moment to run free.